Okay, so let's unpack this. You probably have a pair of jeans on right now. Or, I mean, if you don't, there is almost certainly a pair draped over a chair nearby.
Yeah, or folded up in a drawer just a few feet away.
Exactly. They're just so ubiquitous that we don't even really see them anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Denim is just this default background noise of our wardrobes.
It completely fades into the background. Pun intended, I guess.
Right. But what if I told you that simple blue fabric isn't just a piece of clothing? What if I told you that a pair of jeans is actually this highly engineered camouflage?
Because it really is. It's masking so much.
It is. It's an incredibly complex system of agriculture, of toxic chemistry, global trade, labor exploitation, and shifting human identity. And it's all perfectly masquerading as this humble, everyday garment.
It really is the ultimate disguise. We
Right.
look at a pair of blue jeans and we just see a reliable, basic staple. We don't see the global infrastructure behind it.
So today, our mission is to completely deconstruct that system. We are going to take some incredibly deep, highly analytical, systems-level thinking from our sources. There's actually this persona in the notes named Kenny who looks at the world through this intense macro lens.
Yeah, Kenny's framework is fascinating.
It is. So we're going to take his analytical approach and apply it to the most universal piece of clothing you own.
Because if we trace denim all the way back to its origins, what we are really tracing is the history of the modern world.
That's a massive claim, but the sources totally back it up.
They do. We are going to follow this material from its life as a raw biological plant to its transformation into a structural engineering marvel.
And we have to look at how the demand for this fabric essentially catalyzed the Industrial Revolution. Right?
Exactly. How it was deeply entangled with the darkest histories of global trade and exploited labor. And then how it underwent these bizarre, almost impossible cultural shifts.
Right, because we are talking about a fabric that went from a rough, dirt-stained miner's uniform to a fierce symbol of youth rebellion.
And then to an anti-establishment counterculture flag, and eventually to a $1,000 luxury status symbol walking down a runway in Paris.
It's just wild. And finally, we'll confront the massive modern environmental crisis it presents today. So this isn't just about fashion for you guys listening. It is a journey through biology, structural engineering, sociology, and raw economics.
It's basically everything all woven together.
I am completely fascinated by this, especially the idea of looking at something so familiar and realizing, absolutely nothing about how it actually works.
Most people don't. We just put them on and go about our day.
Right. So let's start right at the physical foundation. Let's strip away all the cultural baggage for a minute and look at the anatomy of the fabric itself, because even the language we use to describe it is essentially a hidden map of global trade routes.
It's true. The linguistics actually tell a story of regional specialization.
So where do the words denim and jeans actually come from? Because I use them interchangeably all the time.
Well, denim is actually a linguistic corruption that comes from France. In a town called Nimes, weavers were producing this very specific, sturdy twill fabric.
Okay, Nimes, N-I-M-E-S, right.
Right. And it was known in French as serge de Nîmes, which just means a serge or a twill fabric from Nîmes.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so if you say serge de Nîmes quickly over time and drop the first word, you're left with denim. Denim.
Denim. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So what about jeans? Because historically those meant different things, right?
Exactly. Jeans traces its roots to Genoa, Italy. The weavers in Genoa were famous for producing a tough fustian cotton fabric.
And this was for the sailors, right? The dock workers.
Yes, the Genoese Navy needed durable pants that could hold up to the brutal friction of life on a ship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the French word for Genoa is Jane.
Okay, so the pants made from the fabric from Genoa became known as jeans.
You got it. Originally, denim and jaune were two distinct fabrics. Denim was considered slightly higher quality and heavier.
But over the centuries, the terms just blurred together.
Right, as the American market absorbed both, you ended up with jeans made out of denim.
Okay, so we have French and Italian trade routes hiding in plain sight in our vocabulary. But physically, structurally, what is actually happening when we zoom in on a pair of jeans?
If we strip it down to first principles, traditional denim is purely a plant-based textile. It is constructed entirely of pure cellulose cotton fibers.
Pure cellulose. And to understand this biologically, we have to look at the cotton plant itself, right?
Exactly. The fluffy white boll that the plant produces is essentially pure cellulose. And cellulose is a structural carbohydrate.
Wait, a structural carbohydrate. Let's pause there because that's fascinating. So it's essentially the plant's skeleton.
Yes, it's the biological scaffolding. It is the primary component of the cell walls of green plants. It's what gives a plant its physical strength to stand upright against gravity and wind.
So human beings, at some point thousands of years ago, figured out how to harvest that microscopic plant skeleton, twist it together, and repurpose it into a second skin for ourselves.
That is exactly what it is. We are literally borrowing the evolutionary engineering of the cotton plant.
That's incredible to think about.
We harvest that fibrous skeleton and we spin it into thread. But what makes denim unique, what separates it from just a basic cotton bedsheet, isn't just the raw material.
Right, it's the highly specific engineering of the weave. The sources talk a lot about this warp-faced twill structure.
Yes, warp and weft.
Let's make sure we have the mechanics of that perfectly clear for everyone listening because it's central to everything that follows.
Good idea.
So imagine a weaving loom. The warp threads are the ones stretched out under tension, running up and down lengthwise. They are the foundation.
Right, the vertical ones.
And the weft threads are the ones being woven left to right, going back and forth across the warp.
Now, in traditional denim, there is a very deliberate color division here. The warp yarns, those vertical ones held under tension, are dyed indigo blue.
And the weft yarns doing the weaving back and forth.
They are completely undyed. They are left in their natural, raw state, so they appear white or cream-colored.
Oh, so this split is why when you look at a pair of blue jeans, the outside surface is mostly blue, but if you roll up the cuff at the bottom, the inside is mostly white.
Exactly. But the weave itself is what causes that visual effect. It isn't just an alternating checkerboard pattern like a basic plain weave.
Right, it's this twill structure. Explain how a twill actually works mechanically, because this blew my mind.
So in a basic plain weave, think of a standard button-down dress shirt. The threads go over one, under one, over one, under one.
It creates a very flat, uniform grid.
Right. But denim uses a twill, typically a 3-to-1 or a 2-to-1 ratio. This means the horizontal white weft thread will pass under 3 blue vertical warp threads.
Okay.
And then quickly pop over just one before diving under 3 again.
So because it's spending most of its time underneath 3 blue threads, the blue threads dominate the front or the face of the fabric.
Exactly, hence the term warp-face twill. And because every time the horizontal thread goes across, it offsets its starting position by 1 thread, it creates this visual staircase effect.
So if you look closely at your jeans right now, you won't see a flat grid. You will see a distinct diagonal rib running across the fabric.
Yes. That diagonal line is the defining characteristic of a twill weave.
But that diagonal rib isn't just an aesthetic choice. They didn't do it because it looked cool.
Not at all.
The sources are incredibly clear that this was a deliberate structural engineering decision designed to solve a very physical problem, which is abrasion.
Right. Think about the surface area. In a flat, plain weave, every time a thread crosses another, there is a tiny intersection that sits at the exact same height as all the others.
So if you take a piece of sandpaper, or I guess more accurately for the 1850s, the jagged edge of a rock in a silver mine, and you scrape it across a plain weave fabric, what happens?
Friction hits all those little intersections simultaneously. The fabric will snag, the threads will break, and a hole will form very quickly.
It just catches everything. It's like dragging a rake over a flat, paved road. Any little bump gets hit.
That's a great analogy. But the twill structure completely changes the geometry of the surface.
Because the threads are floating over multiple other threads, right?
Right, and because of that diagonal rib, the surface area that is actually exposed to friction at any given microsecond is drastically reduced.
So when you scrape against a twill, the mechanical stress just hits the top of that diagonal ridge and skips over the valleys in between.
Exactly. The fabric absorbs the friction, distributes the kinetic energy along the diagonal line, and prevents the threads from snagging and snapping.
It makes the fabric incredibly durable and resistant to tearing while remaining surprisingly flexible.
It really is brilliant. It's microscopic shock absorption built directly into the fabric of the pants.
And that physical friction brings us to perhaps the most iconic, defining characteristic of denim, which is the fade.
Ah, yes. The chemistry of how it loses its color over time.
For years, I just assumed the dye was cheap or that it simply washed out in the laundry like a fading t-shirt.
A lot of people think that.
But the notes go into deep detail about the unique, almost combative chemical relationship between the cotton cellulose and the indigo dye. Indigo doesn't behave like normal dyes, does it?
No, it behaves almost completely opposite to what you would want in a modern textile.
How so?
Well, a modern synthetic dye is designed to penetrate all the way into the core of the fiber and bond permanently. If you buy a red cotton t-shirt, you expect it to stay red.
Right, if the color rubs off on your hands, you return it because it's defective.
Exactly. But indigo dye has remarkably poor penetration. The indigo molecule is actually quite large, and it doesn't chemically bond easily to the inner core of the cotton cellulose.
It basically refuses to soak in.
Right. Instead, it oxidizes and solidifies on the outer surface of the yarn.
And historically, this was natural plant-based indigo extracted from the indigofera plant, right?
Yes. Today, the vast majority is synthesized from petroleum in a lab, but the chemical behavior remains identical. The dye builds up like a crust on the outside of the yarn.
Leaving the core of the yarn completely raw and white.
Exactly.
Think of it like this. It's like painting a beautiful hardwood floor, but you completely skip using any primer.
Oh, that's good.
You just slop blue paint right onto the sealed wood. For the first few days, it looks perfectly uniformly blue. But as soon as you start walking on it, living on it, the friction of your shoes is going to start chipping that blue paint away at the highest traffic spots.
Right, the paint flakes off, and you start seeing the raw, unpainted wood grain underneath.
That is exactly what is happening to your jeans. As you walk, as you sit down, as you bend your knees, the sheer physical friction of your daily life is literally chipping the indigo crust off the top of the cotton yarn, revealing the white core underneath.
That is a perfect analogy, and it fundamentally reframes what fading actually is.
Because the fade is not a failure of the dye process.
Yeah. No, it is a highly localized mechanical reaction to your specific lifestyle.
Wow. So if you carry a wallet in your back right pocket every day, the friction of sitting against chairs will chip the indigo away in the exact shape of that wallet.
Yes. Or if you are a carpenter, the knees will fade white much faster than someone who works at a desk.
The fabric becomes autobiographical. It physically records the movements of the body that wears it.
It's a wearable ledger.
And what's so strange is that in literally any other garment, if the color rubbed off because of friction, we would consider the garment ruined. We'd throw it away.
But with denim, that degradation, that slow destruction of the color, is precisely what gives the garment its emotional value.
The more damaged it is, the more personalized it feels.
Right.
But this incredibly brilliant combination of systems, the biological cotton plant, the engineered twill weave, the surface-level indigo chemistry, none of this was invented in a sterile laboratory overnight.
No, this was the result of a slow, grueling evolution of human craft that eventually collided head-on with the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, and to understand just how massive that collision was, we really have to look at how denim was made before machines took over.
Because the pre-industrial craft pipeline for making a pair of work pants was an exercise in extreme patience and labor. It was an entirely holistic process.
Walk us through that pre-industrial nightmare, because I think modern consumers, myself included, have completely lost context for how hard it used to be just to make a piece of cloth.
We absolutely have.
Yeah.
You couldn't just order a bolt of fabric on the internet.
So where did the process start?
It started in the dirt.
Mm.
You had to physically farm the cotton and harvest the bolls by hand. You had to farm the indigo plants, ferment the leaves, and extract the dye pigment.
So much manual labor before you even have materials.
And once you had the raw cotton, you had to gin it, which meant painstakingly removing all the tiny sticky seeds from the fluffy fibers by hand.
And then came carding, right?
Yeah.
Explain what that looks like physically, because the visual in the notes is wild.
Imagine taking two large, flat wooden paddles covered in hundreds of tiny metal spikes, almost like dog brushes.
Okay.
You take a clump of raw, chaotic cotton fluff, place it between the paddles, and drag them across each other.
Sounds exhausting.
It was. You do this over and over until you physically force all those tangled microscopic fibers to lie perfectly straight and parallel to each other. You are creating a continuous, orderly web of fibers.
It's like brushing tangles out of very thick hair until it all throws in one direction.
Precisely. And only once it is carded can you begin spinning.
And the sources highlight that spinning was actually the single biggest bottleneck in the entire history of textile production.
Oh, easily. For thousands of years, spinning was done by hand using a drop spindle, or later, a spinning wheel.
So a worker would have to pinch a few of those parallel cotton fibers, gently pull them out, and twist them together to lock them into a continuous yarn.
Right. It took hours upon hours just to spin enough yarn for a few inches of fabric.
And after all that, you still have to dye it.
Yes. The yarn is taken to the dyer. And because indigo doesn't penetrate easily, as we discussed, you couldn't just soak it once.
The dyer had to lower the skeins of yarn into a massive vat of fermented indigo, right?
Yes, and when you pull the yarn out of the vat, it isn't actually blue. It is a sickly yellowish green.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah. But as the liquid hits the oxygen in the air, a chemical reaction occurs, and it slowly oxidizes and turns blue.
So you let it oxidize, then you dip it again.
And again, sometimes 10 or 15 times to build up a deep dark color.
And finally, after all of that, the yarn goes to a weaver who manually throws a wooden shuttle back and forth on a hand loom to create that twill weave.
The amount of human energy embedded in a single pair of pants was astronomical.
It's mind-blowing. And what strikes me about this era is the nature of the knowledge involved.
It was very intuitive.
Right, but the farmers, the dyers, the weavers, they understood the material deeply. It was a localized knowledge system. A dyer knew by the smell of the vat if the fermentation was right. A spinner knew by the tension in her fingers if the yarn would hold.
But then the industrial explosion hits, and it completely shatters this entire ecosystem.
Mechanization changes everything.
It built the modern world. In 1793, Eli Whitney patents the cotton gin, which mechanizes the seed separation, allowing raw cotton to be processed at unimaginable speeds.
And then we get the invention of the spinning mule, which solved the bottleneck, right? Explain how the spinning mule changed the game.
Well, instead of one woman spinning one thread on a wheel, a spinning mule was a massive water or steam-powered machine that could spin hundreds of bobbins of yarn simultaneously.
Hundreds at once.
Yes, it automated the precise drafting, twisting, and winding of the fiber. Suddenly, the bottleneck is gone. You have a flood of cheap, strong yarn.
And that yarn is fed into massive steam-driven power looms that automate the complex twill weaving process, slamming the shuttle back and forth faster than the human eye can track.
Exactly. And eventually, in the late 1800s, chemists figure out how to synthesize indigo in a lab, completely eliminating the need for the agricultural indigo process.
The scale is almost incomprehensible compared to the hand loom. But the sources note that this wasn't just a change in speed, it was a profound shift in human knowledge and our relationship to the object.
It really was. In the pre-industrial era, knowledge was holistic. A master artisan understood the entire life cycle of the fabric.
But industrialization fragmented that knowledge.
Right. It broke the process down into highly specialized, repetitive factory tasks. One worker manages the carding machine, another monitors the spinning mule, another tends the dye vats, another watches the power loom.
And another sews the final seams. No single human being in that factory understands the full system end to end anymore.
The holistic knowledge literally moved out of the artisan's hands and was encoded into the gears and the iron of the machinery itself.
And all of this industrial momentum culminates in 1873. This is the ultimate turning point where denim goes from being just a durable fabric on a roll to becoming the modern garment we recognize today.
The birth of the blue jean.
Exactly. This is when Levi Strauss, a dry goods merchant in San Francisco, and Jacob Davis, a tailor from Nevada, team up. Davis had this major problem, right? The miners he was making pants for kept ripping the pockets right off when they stuffed them full of heavy ore tools.
Because the cotton thread just couldn't hold the weight of rocks and tools.
Right. So Davis had this brilliant, brutally simple idea. He took small copper rivets, the kind used for attaching straps to horse saddles, and hammered them directly into the corners of the pockets and the base of the button fly.
That patent in 1873 for using metal rivets to reinforce the stress points of work pants was the birth of the modern jean.
You combine the structural abrasion resistance of the warp-faced twill, the cheap abundance of industrial cotton, and the mechanical reinforcement of copper rivets, and you have created a virtually indestructible piece of workwear.
It was a perfect storm of utility.
Okay, but I have to push back here. I have to look at this from a different angle. Yes, we solved the production bottleneck. We made jeans incredibly cheap, incredibly durable, and standardized so every miner and railroad worker could afford a pair. But in doing so, didn't we completely strip the soul out of the material?
How do you mean?
Well, we took a highly localized regional craft that had unique character and human imperfection woven into it, and we turned it into a cold, mass-produced, identical uniform. By scaling it up, didn't we permanently ruin the individual character of the fabric?
That is a very common romantic critique of industrialization. But if we look at the systems level analysis, it misses the true function of the garment.
Okay.
The industrial system wasn't trying to create character. It was optimizing for uniformity, speed, and absolute reliability.
Hmm.
Denim stopped being a quaint regional craft and transformed into physical infrastructure for labor.
Infrastructure, like a tool.
Exactly. It was a standardized tool, no different than a steel hammer or a pickaxe. The soul, to use your word, was no longer located in the making of the garment.
Because the industrial process erased the maker.
Right. But the sheer durability of that industrial gene meant that the soul shifted to the wearing of the garment.
Oh, I see.
The blank uniform canvas allowed the worker to imprint their own life, their own sweat, their own physical fading onto the fabric over years of use. The character was earned, not woven.
That is a fascinating pivot. The character moves from the creator to the consumer.
Exactly.
But we cannot ignore the machinery that made that uniform possible. To feed those massive power looms, to create that global infrastructure for labor, the industry required a literal mountain of raw materials.
And that insatiable demand built a global system that was fundamentally reliant on severe human exploitation.
This is where the history of the fabric becomes very dark, and the sources demand that we look unflinchingly at the hidden costs of scaling this industry. The rise of denim as a global commodity is absolutely inseparable from the history of empire, forced extraction, and coerced labor.
We have to acknowledge that. Let's start with the base biological material, cotton.
The foundation of the 19th century denim industry was built on the American South's cotton economy.
Yes.
And as the sources note, that economy was inextricably linked to the transatlantic slave trade and the brutal realities of enslaved labor. The massive, roaring expansion of the industrial textile mills in the northern United States and across Great Britain, the very mills pioneering these new technologies were directly fed by and profited from cotton that was planted, tended, and harvested by enslaved people.
The Industrial Revolution in textiles was, tragically, fueled by human bondage.
And the exploitation wasn't limited to the cotton fields of the Americas either, was it?
No, if we look at the chemistry, the indigo dye, we see a similar pattern of colonial extraction. Before synthetic indigo took over, the massive demand for the blue dye was met by colonial economies, primarily in India and West Africa.
What happened there?
European imperial powers forced local populations to shift away from growing subsistence food crops that fed their communities, and instead forced them to grow indigo as a cash crop to serve the textile markets back in Europe.
That's devastating.
It devastated local agricultural ecosystems and created cycles of famine and debt.
The sources introduce a very specific economic concept here to explain how this was allowed to happen. They call it externalized costs. Explain how externalized costs apply to a pair of jeans.
Well, an externalized cost is a cost generated by the production of a good that is not reflected in the price tag paid by the consumer.
So it's off the books.
Right. It is a cost pushed off the balance sheet and forced onto a third party. Denim became cheap, affordable, and widely available precisely because the true cost of producing it, the environmental destruction of the soil, the theft of human labor, the brutality of enslavement and colonialism, were hidden.
They were externalized away from the consumer who bought the pants and pushed entirely onto the laborers and the land.
Exactly. The consumer paid a low financial price, but an enormous physical and moral cost was paid by someone else, far away in the supply chain.
And the really unsettling part of this analysis is that the sources point out this exact same structural hierarchy still exists today.
The mechanisms have modernized. The legality has shifted, but the fundamental power dynamic remains identical.
If you map out the value chain of a modern pair of jeans, the people doing the hardest physical work, the farmers growing the cotton in India or Texas, are at the very bottom, operating on razor-thin margins, entirely vulnerable to climate and market crashes.
Right. And the factory workers, cutting and sewing the garments in places like Bangladesh or Vietnam, are making incredibly low wages, working in highly pressured environments.
But the brands, the marketing departments, and the corporate retailers sitting at the top of the chain, who never touch a cotton plant or a sewing machine, capture the vast majority of the profits. When you really look at it, a pair of denim jeans is basically a topological map of global power dynamics.
Exactly. If we connect this to the broader systems perspective Kenny outlines in the notes, we see that progress in the denim industry over the last 2 centuries hasn't actually been about eliminating human suffering or ecological extraction.
It's just been about moving it.
Yes. It moved the suffering geographically, and it hid it behind incredibly complex, intentionally opaque, global supply chains.
So today, the cotton might be grown in India. It might be spun into yarn in a massive facility in Pakistan, woven into denim fabric in China, cut and assembled into jeans in Bangladesh, and finally sold in a brightly lit boutique in New York or London.
The system is perfectly designed to fragment the process so thoroughly that accountability becomes entirely diluted.
The people geographically and economically closest to the raw material have the absolute least power, and the people closest to the final consumer capture all the value.
It is a profoundly grim reality. The physical interface is a pair of pants, but the back-end architecture is a machine of exploitation.
So we have thoroughly established denim as this utilitarian, indestructible structural uniform born out of intense physical labor, dirt, and dark historical origins. And that raises what I think is the most baffling question in the entire history of fashion. How on earth did this exact same fabric, carrying all of this heavy, labor-intensive baggage, become the ultimate global symbol of youth, freedom, sex appeal, and high fashion? It makes absolutely no logical sense.
It really defies almost all logic of how clothing normally operates. But that is the magic of denim's cultural evolution.
The sources describe it as the ultimate cultural chameleon.
It is. Over the past 150 years, the meaning of denim has completely inverted itself multiple times. We can trace this through 5 distinct phases of cultural meaning.
Okay, let's go through them. Phase 1, we've covered extensively. That was utility, right?
Right. Phase 1 spans the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this period, jeans were strictly workwear. They were for miners, cowboys, railroad workers, and farmers.
Wearing denim signaled one thing. You worked with your body in the dirt for a living.
Exactly. It was highly functional, deeply low status, and existed completely outside the realm of fashion. If you wore a suit, you were a manager. If you wore denim, you were labor.
But then we cross the threshold into the mid-20th century. Phase 2, rebellion. And this is where everything flips.
It's the 1950s.
Right. The post-World War II environment in America was defined by a massive push toward conformity. The ideal was the suburbs, the gray flannel suit, the obedient corporate employee.
But the soldiers who had returned from the war had gotten used to wearing their durable denim dungarees while off duty or doing manual labor. They brought that casualness back with them.
And then Hollywood acts as an accelerant.
Oh, massively.
You get Marlon Brando in The Wild One wearing cuffed jeans on a motorcycle. You get James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, brooding in his denim.
Those visual representations were atomic bombs in the culture of the 1950s. Suddenly, denim wasn't just for digging coal, it was the uniform of the alienated youth.
It was a deliberate visual rejection of the father's gray flannel suits.
Yes, it signaled defiance, danger, and a refusal to conform to the polite, sanitized expectations of post-war society.
And what I find so fascinating, and the notes highlight this beautifully, is the absolute irony of how authority figures reacted. In the 1950s, school boards across America literally banned students from wearing denim to school.
Because they thought the fabric itself was a corrupting influence, a sign of juvenile delinquency?
But anyone who has ever met a teenager knows that banning something is the fastest way to make it cool.
Obviously.
The school bans didn't suppress denim, they weaponized it. The bans officially confirmed that denim was dangerous, which instantly multiplied its cultural power tenfold.
Which sets the perfect stage for Phase 3, counterculture.
Right.
Moving into the 1960s and 70s, the rebellious teenager evolves into the political radical. Hippies, civil rights marchers, and anti-war protesters adopted denim en masse.
But they didn't just wear it, they mutated it.
They customized it wildly with colorful embroidery, peace sign patches, and aggressive hand distressing. Bell-bottoms exaggerated the silhouette.
So wearing heavily customized, worn-out denim became a potent anti-capitalist, anti-establishment political statement.
It was a way of physically aligning oneself with the working class and rejecting the slick, manufactured synthetic clothing of the corporate world.
But the establishment always finds a way to absorb a rebellion. Which brings us to Phase 4, normalization.
By the time we get to the late 1970s and 1980s, the political edge wears off. Jeans simply become everyday wear.
They successfully crossed all class lines, age demographics, and geographies. Presidents wear them on the weekend. Mechanics wear them to work.
They signaled casualness, universality, and an approachable democratic spirit. They became the default setting for human legs.
And once a garment is universally accepted, the market will inevitably find a way to fracture it into tiers of status. And that is the final flip. Phase 5, commodification.
Yes. In the 1980s and beyond, we see the rise of designer denim. High-fashion brands like Calvin Klein and later luxury European houses realized they can take this cheap cotton workwear, tailor it tightly, slap a designer logo on the back pocket, and charge exorbitant prices.
A fabric that was literally invented to be the cheapest, toughest option for a man swinging a pickaxe in a dark mine somehow transitioned into a $1,000 luxury status symbol walking down a runway in Milan.
It is breathtaking. Think about the contradictions this single fabric absorbs simultaneously. It can signal deep humility, a connection to salt-of-the-earth labor roots, but it can also signal intense exclusivity, snobbery, and wealth.
Like when someone is wearing a rare $600 pair of heavy-ounce Japanese selvage denim.
Exactly. Its meaning has become completely detached from its utility and is now highly dependent entirely on how it is styled and subcategorized.
It is all about the styling context. The subcultures prove this.
Look at the punk rock movement in the 70s and 80s. They took denim and violently ripped it apart with razor blades and safety pins. The message was DIY destruction, nihilism, and urban decay.
Then, look at hip-hop culture in the 1990s. They adopted denim but completely changed the scale. They wore heavily oversized baggy jeans, dropping the waistline.
The message there was about taking up space, commanding a massive visual presence, and rejecting traditional tailoring norms.
Meanwhile, the minimalist movement of the 2000s favored incredibly clean, stiff, dark indigo denim, tailored perfectly to project a quiet architectural refinement.
But it is the exact same underlying twill weave, the identical plant fiber.
But it is broadcasting completely contradictory messages depending on the cut and the context. Is denim the only fabric in human history that has successfully inverted its own meaning this many times without fundamentally changing its physical structure? I can't think of anything else that acts like this.
I really think it stands alone. Denim has become what sociologists call a platform for symbols. It no longer tells one rigid, inherent story. It is a blank screen that allows the wearer to project their own desired identity onto it.
So, wealthy consumers living in high-rise apartments wear heavily distressed, artificially dirty denim to borrow a working-class, rugged, authentic aesthetic.
And suburban youth adopt denim to simulate the edgy rebellion of urban subcultures without exposing themselves to any real risk.
The physical fabric is incredibly structurally stable, like it lasts for years, but its symbolic meaning is entirely unstable and fluid.
Completely fluid.
And this concept you just brought up, this idea of simulating an experience, leads us perfectly into the next layer of our analysis. Because we aren't just simulating a cultural vibe anymore through the cut of the pants. Modern consumers have become obsessed with literally simulating the physical wear and tear of the fabric itself.
Yes.
This brings us to Section 5. The sociology of wear and what the sources brilliantly call manufactured nostalgia.
We talked earlier about the chemistry of the fade, right? How the indigo chips off the cotton to record the body's movements.
Right.
Because of this, denim is one of the extremely rare textiles in the world where physical damage actually increases its perceived value. A perfectly crisp, dark pair of jeans is often seen as sterile or boring.
But a pair with distinct fades, the whiskers, which are those horizontal white creases radiating from the crotch across the lap, the honeycombs, which are the geometric fade patterns that form behind the knees from bending, the frayed hems, the blown-out pockets.
Historically, these details were evidence of a life actually lived. They were earned through years of physical movement, dirt, and work. They made the garment emotionally resonant because it proved the wearer had been through something.
Right. I remember when I first learned about raw selvage denim, the traditional way. You buy them completely rigid. They literally feel like stiff cardboard armor.
You could stand them up on their own sometimes.
You really can. The first week you wear them, they actually leave bruises behind your knees because the fabric is so stiff it fights back when you walk. You have to suffer through the break-in period. You endure the discomfort. You wear them every day. You don't wash them for months. And eventually the heat and moisture of your body softens the cotton, and the friction chips away the indigo, and they mold perfectly to your exact body shape.
It is a deeply personal, slow journey.
But the sources dive into the dark reality of how the modern market has corrupted this process. They call it aesthetic outsourcing.
That is a perfect term for it. Modern consumers still desperately want the aesthetic reward of that lived-in, rugged, authentic look. They want the whiskers and the honeycombs.
But they absolutely refuse to spend 2 or 3 years breaking in stiff, uncomfortable canvas to earn them. They want the look instantly, right off the rack.
Exactly. So to meet that massive global demand, the denim industry had to figure out how to simulate years of hardware in a matter of minutes before you even buy the jeans. They use intense chemical baths and brutal mechanical force in factories to artificially break the fabric down.
They are basically pre-destroying the pants.
Yes.
And the most notorious, the most dangerous practice the notes highlight in this pursuit of fake authenticity is a process called sandblasting. Explain what sandblasting is and why it is so devastating.
Sandblasting is a manual mechanical process. A factory worker holds a high-pressure hose and blasts the denim garment with a stream of abrasive sand to violently strip the indigo dye off the knees and thighs and artificially soften the fabric.
So it gets the fading job done in seconds.
It does. But here is the catastrophic reality. The sand used in this process contains silica. When that sand hits the denim at high velocity, it shatters into microscopic dust.
And the workers are breathing that in.
Yes. When workers breathe in that respirable crystalline silica dust, those microscopic glass-like shards lodge deep into their lung tissue. The lungs try to heal, creating scar tissue, which turns the lungs stiff and fibrous.
That's horrifying.
It is. This condition is called silicosis. It is a severe, irreversible, progressive, and very often fatal occupational lung disease.
So the workers are literally suffocating to death, their lungs turning to stone, just to make a pair of jeans look like someone wore them for a few years.
Exactly. The intense consumer demand for a specific, authentic aesthetic directly generated a severe occupational health crisis in manufacturing hubs.
Now, I know many major brands have officially banned the practice of sandblasting after public outcry.
They have on paper.
But the sources, cynically though accurately, note that in the complex global supply chain we discussed earlier, production often just shifts into shadowy, subcontracted, unregulated workshop tiers where corporate monitoring is non-existent and the practice continues out of sight.
It gets pushed further down the chain.
I want to pause here because this is where the system gets really interesting and profoundly unsettling on a psychological level. Think about what is actually happening when you buy a pair of heavily pre-distressed jeans. Buying pre-distressed jeans is exactly like buying a video game character that someone else has already played for hundreds of hours and leveled up to the maximum status for you.
That's a fascinating way to put it.
You get the visual status of having done the hard work. You look rugged, you look effortless, you look like you've been on adventures. But you completely skipped the journey. You didn't earn any of it. We are literally buying manufactured nostalgia. We are paying a premium to look like we've lived a life we haven't.
We absolutely are. And the tragic irony of this entire dynamic is staggering. The consumer in the West wants the aesthetic of rugged, effortless, individualistic freedom. But that exact look, the fades, the rips, the softness, is actively generated by and actively hiding the hazardous, highly regimented, highly pressured labor of invisible garment workers overseas.
The consumer buys the illusion of an earned life, while the worker literally risks their actual biological life to manufacture that illusion on an assembly line.
It is the ultimate expression of the disconnect between the visible physical product we wear and the hidden, violent system that produces it.
That is a heavy, heavy realization to carry. And unfortunately, this artificial manipulation of the fabric's surface color is matched by a massive modern manipulation of the fabric's core fiber.
Yes, the stretch problem.
This brings us to a massive contemporary crisis in the denim world. Section 6, the modern paradox of comfort versus circularity. The fundamental biology of denim, the cotton plant skeleton we started with, is actively changing. We spent all this time talking about traditional 100% rigid cotton twill. But let's be honest, that is rarely what we actually buy in a mall today. Today, the market is entirely dominated by stretch denim.
Yes. The introduction of stretch fundamentally altered the chemistry and life cycle of the garment. The rise of stretch denim involves taking that pure cotton yarn and blending it with synthetic petroleum-based fibers.
Primarily elastane, which is known commercially as spandex or lycra, and often blending in polyester as well.
Right.
And we know why this happened. It solves a massive consumer demand problem. I just talked about how painful it is to break in traditional heavy cotton. It restricts your movement, you can't easily bend over, it feels stiff. Adding just 2% or 3% elastane to the weave completely changes the physics of the garment.
It makes jeans instantly comfortable the second you put them on. It allows for vastly tighter, more form-fitting silhouettes like the skinny jean, which dominated fashion for a decade. It makes them vastly more marketable because the consumer doesn't have to suffer for the fit.
The immediate benefits to the consumer are obvious, but the notes highlight the long-term systemic consequences by pointing to the research from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Jeans Redesign Project. They looked at the end-of-life reality for textiles, and the data is incredibly bleak. Less than 1% of the global fiber market is made up of pre- and post-consumer recycled textile.
Less than 1%.
Almost everything we make is eventually burned or buried in a landfill. But why is it so low? How does stretch denim cause this problem?
This is the central technical tension, the paradox of modern denim. Pure 100% cotton denim, despite its massive environmental footprint in the agricultural stage, ages beautifully, is incredibly durable over decades, and crucially, it is a monomaterial.
It is made of just one thing, cellulose.
Exactly. Because it is a monomaterial, it is theoretically very easy to mechanically shred or chemically dissolve and recycle back into new yarn. But stretch blends completely block this circularity.
Explain the mechanism. Why can't we just pull the plastic out of the cotton?
Think of pure cotton denim like a tower made entirely of wooden building blocks. If you are done with the tower, you just knock it over, unstack the wooden blocks, and use them to build something else. It's simple.
Okay, that makes sense.
But blending cotton with elastane is like pouring industrial superglue all over that wooden tower. The wood is still there, but it is now chemically and physically bound to the plastic glue. When elastane is spun into cotton yarn, the synthetic filaments essentially wrap around or bind deeply with the natural fibers.
So you can't easily mechanically or chemically separate those two materials at a commercial scale without destroying both of them.
Right. The technology to do it at scale just doesn't exist yet in a viable way.
Okay, I have to play the role of the modern, slightly defensive consumer here. Look, I understand the environmental logic, but I love my stretch jeans. They are incredibly comfortable. I can sit at a desk for 9 hours a day in them without feeling like I'm being slowly crushed. Are you honestly telling me I have to abandon comfort, go back to wearing stiff, heavy, unforgiving 19th century canvas just to save the planet? Is that the only solution?
I completely understand the resistance, and the industry understands it too, which is why stretch is everywhere. But if we look at this strictly from a systems perspective, the comfort comes with a delayed, invisible cost.
What cost?
By prioritizing immediate physical comfort and tight, trendy fits, the industry has mutated a historically durable product into something that is fundamentally disposable.
Disposable, because of the plastic.
Yes. Elastane has a much shorter lifespan than cotton. Over a relatively short period of time, with wear, with washing, with exposure to the heat of a tumble dryer, the elastane fibers snap and degrade.
The jeans lose their shape recovery, they get baggy and sagging at the knees and the seat.
And because they can no longer hold their shape, and because they cannot be recycled due to the blended materials, they go straight into the trash. The current system prioritizes rapid fashion churn and short-term physical comfort over the long-term structural durability and recyclability of the garment. You are comfortable, but the garment's lifespan drops from 10 years to maybe 2.
Wow. So if the stretch guarantees that we absolutely cannot recycle them, then what is the true compounding cost of having to manufacture new pairs over and over and over again to replace the sagging ones? That brings us to Section 7, the illusion of sustainable denim. Because the environmental footprint of creating a brand new pair of jeans from scratch is spread across a massive, complex life cycle, and the toll it takes on the earth is staggering.
It truly is. We have to look at the entire chain. It starts once again in the dirt with the cotton. Cultivating conventional cotton requires monumental amounts of water, often in regions already experiencing water scarcity. It requires vast tracts of agricultural land.
And critically, it relies heavily on petrochemicals. While cotton cultivation takes up a relatively small percentage of global agricultural land, roughly 2.5%, the sources note that it historically accounts for a vastly disproportionate share of global insecticide and pesticide use.
It poisons the soil and the agricultural workers. But as devastating as the farming is, the agricultural impact is really only the prologue. The wet processing stage is where denim production becomes deeply, toxically problematic.
Right, wet processing. When we say wet processing, we aren't just talking about tossing the jeans in an industrial washing machine to clean them. We are talking about the hardcore chemical treatments. This is the dyeing with synthetic indigo, the bleaching to create highlights, the stone washing, the application of formaldehyde resins to prevent the cotton from shrinking.
The sources state unequivocally that textile dyeing and finishing are among the largest contributors to global clean water pollution.
We are talking about unregulated factories dumping millions of gallons of toxic chemical runoff, heavy metals, and dyes directly into local rivers and waterways in manufacturing regions in the developing world. The rivers literally run the color of whatever the fashion trend is that season.
The devastation to local ecosystems is undeniable. Now, the industry is highly aware of this PR nightmare, which is why we are seeing a massive corporate push for newer, greener technologies. The notes detail several of these innovations.
Let's talk about those.
For example, there's ozone finishing, which uses ozone gas instead of thousands of gallons of water and harsh bleaching chemicals to lighten the fabric. There is laser distressing, which uses computer-guided lasers to literally burn the fade patterns, the whiskers, and the honeycombs right into the surface of the fabric.
This chemical baths.
Exactly. And there is foam dyeing, like the advanced technology developed by the company Genealogia, which applies the indigo dye using a foam rather than a massive liquid vat, drastically reducing water usage by up to 90%.
Okay, stop right there. Because when you list them out like that, using lasers instead of sand, using gas instead of water, those sound like incredible sci-fi breakthroughs. Huge water savings, protecting workers from silicosis, eliminating toxic runoff. So if the big brands adopt these machines, problem solved, right?
Sure.
We can buy our jeans guilt-free again.
That is exactly what the marketing departments want you to conclude. But this raises a profound, critical question from the sources. What exactly are we sustaining? Yes, these technologies are impressive engineering feats, and yes, they offer major reductions in harm per individual garment. But a systems-level analysis reveals that these technologies are very often used as a branding layer, a greenwashing marketing tool, rather than a catalyst for a full, fundamental redesign of the broken system.
I see where you're going. So a fast fashion brand can put a massive billboard up saying, look at us, we use lasers now, our denim is sustainable. But if that exact same fast fashion brand is using those lasers to pump out 20 million pairs of disposable, unrecyclable, trend cycle stretch jeans every single year, aren't we just putting a high-tech Band-Aid on a bullet wound?
Exactly. The overall volume of resource extraction, energy use, and eventual landfill waste still entirely overwhelms the localized technological efficiency.
Sustainable denim under the current market paradigm is highly relative.
Lowering the environmental impact of producing a single pair of jeans is undeniably a good thing. A laser replacing toxic sandblasting protects the worker in that specific facility from suffocating to death, which is vital and necessary. But it doesn't change the macroscopic reality that the garment is fundamentally designed to degrade, go out of style, and be thrown into a landfill in 2 years.
If the underlying business model still relies on infinite overproduction, rapid disposability, and endless consumption, the system itself is still catastrophically broken. We are just making the apocalypse slightly more efficient.
That's a dark way to put it, but it's true.
To truly wrap our minds around the sale of this, we need to zoom all the way out. We need to leave the chemistry and the factories behind and look at the philosophy of the system itself. This brings us to Section 8, our final analytical lens. This is where the notes from that persona we mentioned at the start, Kenny, really pull all these disparate threads together. Kenny doesn't look at denim as clothing. He views denim purely as a macrocosm for how human systems operate.
Kenny's framework is fascinating because it is so detached and analytical. He looks at the history of denim and sees the classic human transformation of necessity into identity.
Denim started entirely as a solution to a raw physical problem. Workers needed clothes that wouldn't disintegrate in a mine. It was pure utility.
But over time, as the culture shifted, humans couldn't leave it alone. We inevitably projected meaning onto the object. We took a functional tool and mutated it into a complex, contradictory symbol of self-expression, rebellion, and status.
But the most powerful concept in Kenny's notes, the idea that really stuck with me, is his concept of the thought filter. He argues that human systems, capitalism, global trade, industrialization, they can only scale up by deliberately hiding their massive complexity from the end user.
Right. Think about your smartphone. You tap a glass screen, an app opens, it feels seamless and magical. The phone is the interface. You don't see millions of lines of code. You don't see the massive server farms eating up electricity. And you certainly don't see the brutal labor in the cobalt mines that built the battery.
Kenny argues that a simple pair of blue jeans acts as the exact same kind of interface. You walk into a brightly lit, air-conditioned store, you see a clean, perfectly folded, beautifully faded pair of jeans on a wooden table, and you hand over your credit card. That is the physical interface.
But the incredibly complex underlying system, the pesticide-soaked agriculture, the toxic dye chemistry, the convoluted global shipping routes, the low-wage labor exploitation in the global south, all of that is filtered out.
It remains entirely deliberately invisible to you, the consumer.
And it absolutely has to remain invisible for the system to function at its current hyperinflated scale. If a thought filter failed, if you had to physically confront the reality of the silicosis risk, the poisoned rivers, the enslaved history, and the sheer crushing volume of landfill waste, every single time you picked up a pair of jeans, the consumption rate would plummet instantly.
Progress in the denim industry over the last century, as Kenny so astutely notes, hasn't actually been about eliminating the costs of production. It's purely been about redistributing them.
Moving the pollution, moving the harsh labor, moving the environmental devastation geographically out of sight of the wealthy consumer, creating a perfectly clean interface for a deeply dirty machine.
So, what does this all mean for us? The notes ask a profound, almost uncomfortable question, and I want to ask you, the listener, right now as you sit there. Are you wearing the system consciously, or did you just blindly inherit it from a marketing department? When you put on those distressed jeans this morning to express your unique individuality, are you actually just participating in a massive, standardized, globally exploitative system that carefully filtered out all of its negative consequences before it reached your closet?
It is a sobering thought. It forces us to realize that we are always constantly participating in vast systems we don't fully see or understand. Denim just happens to make that architecture visible, but only if you are willing to look closely enough at the seams.
Wow. Okay, we need to wrap up this massive journey. We started with an ancient twill weave from France and Italy, combined with a weird surface-level indigo dye chemistry. We watched that simple biological and chemical combination collide with the roaring machinery of the Industrial Revolution to conquer the world.
Along the way, it absorbed the darkest contradictions of slavery and colonial extraction. It morphed into the uniform of youth rebellion, it transformed into a luxury status symbol, and now it sits squarely at the center of a modern environmental and circularity crisis.
It is an overwhelming amount of history woven into a pair of pants.
It really is the ultimate story of how humans build immense structures, assign arbitrary meaning to them, completely lose track of the consequences of scaling them, and then desperately try to reclaim some sense of authenticity at the end. But it is important to note that the sources do not leave us with nihilism.
Why don't?
They leave us with actionable guidelines for consumer responsibility. We are part of the system, which means we have agency within it. We aren't entirely helpless.
Right, the ethics of wear. The notes are very clear on what a better, more conscious choice looks like if you want to push back against the worst clues of the system for you listeners. First and foremost, buy fewer pairs. Step off the trend cycle, wear the ones you own longer. Prefer durable, heavier construction over flimsy trend washes.
When the friction of your life finally wears a hole in them, repair them instead of discarding them. Patching denim honors its history.
And if longevity and the possibility of recycling matter to you, choose monomaterials. Seek out 100% rigid cotton and avoid the heavy stretch blends, even if it means sacrificing a little bit of immediate comfort for a break-in period.
And be highly critically suspicious of heavy artificial distressing, unless the brand is radically transparent about the safety of their finishing facilities.
The greatest virtue of denim, historically and physically, is that it authentically gets better, softer, and more personalized with genuine care and time. Its greatest modern flaw is that the industrial machine constantly tries to fake that care and fake that time at a massive, destructive scale.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you with one final image to ponder. The next time you pull on your favorite pair of jeans, take a second. Look down at those faded creases radiating behind the knees. Look at the frayed distressing on the edges of the front pockets. If you didn't put those marks there yourself through years of walking, working, and actually living your life, think about the phantom worker in a hot, loud factory on the exact opposite side of the world who did. Think about the person who held a high-pressure hose or operated a laser or used mechanical force to artificially age that fabric so you could easily buy the look of a lived-in life off a rack. Whose story are you actually wearing today?